My name is Leah. I'm 29 years old, a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army, and currently stationed back in Virginia. But this story starts a year ago, when I was deployed overseas. Far from home, far from everything I thought was safe. I had always been the quiet daughter. The one who didn't cry when Dad yelled. The one who didn't complain when Mom prioritized my brother's football games over my basic training graduation. My brother Caleb was the golden child. Star athlete in high school, college scholarship, handsome, charming, always had something clever to say at the dinner table. Meanwhile, I enlisted straight out of high school. No parade, no congratulations. Just a pat on the back and a "don't get yourself killed" from Dad. I didn't mind. At least, I thought I didn't. I'd been deployed for 7 months when the email came through. Subject: urgent, mortgage account closure request. I thought it was spam at first. Then I saw the address. My house. The one I bought at 25. The one I saved for by skipping nights out, working extra shifts, and living in a shared barracks until I could afford a down payment. I opened the attachment, and my heart stopped. It was a final notice from a closing agency. It said the sale of my house had gone through. Signed. Sealed. Done. I stared at the screen, eyes blurring, blood draining from my face. How? I hadn't listed it. I hadn't signed a thing. I hadn't even been on U.S. soil in over half a year. I tried calling the U.S. number listed on the email, but the satellite connection kept cutting out. I sent an encrypted message to my lawyer back in Virginia. 2 days later, she replied. Her message was short. "Leah, I'm so sorry. It looks like your parents sold your property using a power of attorney. Call me as soon as possible." I dropped the tablet. My stomach twisted like something poisonous had bloomed inside me. How could they? Masan hawati kwani. How could my own parents sell the only thing I ever owned? Masan hawai tera. Without my permission, without even telling me, I requested emergency leave. It got denied. Standard procedure. I had 2 months left before my tour was up. 2 months with a pit in my stomach and rage building like a ticking bomb. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. And all I kept asking myself was, why? Ake, kamen, lene will balas. Why would my own parents betray me like this? Hapamen, pamen, ake, kamen, pamen, Umayer. What could possibly justify stealing my home? Hapamen, the one place I felt like I truly belonged. When I finally landed back in Virginia, I went straight from the tarmac to what used to be my front porch. Only, it wasn't mine anymore. Someone else's car was in the driveway. A toddler's bike leaned against the railing. And the name on the mailbox wasn't mine. It was the name of strangers. Strangers who now lived in the house I had bled, saved, and sacrificed for. And that was the moment I made a promise. If they took my house, I'd take theirs. I didn't knock. I didn't cry. I just stood on the sidewalk across from what used to be mine, hands clenched so tight my nails left crescent moons in my palms. A woman stepped onto the porch, mid-30s, holding a toddler on her hip. She waved politely, smiled like I was just some passerby. I nodded back, numb. She had no idea what that house meant to me. She had no idea I used to fix those railings by hand, or that I spent an entire Christmas painting the living room walls alone. She lived in my memories. And I was just a ghost now. I drove to my parents' house, the one I grew up in. Still 2 stories, white fence, and the same peeling mailbox I used to get grounded for not painting. Mom answered the door. She looked surprised. Not guilty. Not shocked. Just mildly annoyed. "Leah," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "We weren't expecting you for another week." I stepped inside without asking. She hesitated, then shut the door. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "In the garage," she said quickly, then added, "We didn't think you'd mind. You weren't using the house." My blood turned to ice. "Didn't think I'd mind?" I turned to her, voice low but shaking. "You sold it." She looked away. "Technically, your father did." He still had power of attorney from when you left. You never revoked it. I stared at her, trying to make sense of the casual tone in her voice. Mom, that house was mine. You weren't living in it. We were struggling with bills, and Caleb needed a place to stay temporarily. The mortgage was expensive. I blinked. You sold it because Caleb needed a place to crash? She frowned. He was going through a breakup. He was heartbroken. We didn't think. You didn't think I'd care that you sold my house behind my back? She folded her arms. You're a soldier, Leah. You're gone most of the time. We figured you'd understand. Family comes first. Family comes first. Unless that family is me. I turned toward the living room. And that's when I saw it. A framed photo of Caleb on the wall, holding keys in front of my old front door. They didn't even try to hide it. I left without another word. I went straight to my lawyer's office the next morning. She already had the case file open. Power of attorney granted 2 years ago. Never revoked. Used to list and sell the house to a real estate investor. Flipped in 3 weeks. Now in someone else's name. No criminal charges would stick. They hadn't forged anything. They just took advantage of a loophole. Of trust. But that's when she said something else. Your parents' house is in both their names. She tapped a document. And it has a joint deed. But it also has a lien. I leaned forward. What kind of lien? She smiled, slow and deliberate. The kind that makes it very, very vulnerable in court. My lawyer's office was cold. Not from the AC, but from the way her voice turned steel when she said the words. They sold your house under legal power, but they misused it. I leaned in. What does that mean? Is it reversible? She tapped the folder again. Not exactly, but we can go after something else. I raised an eyebrow. She flipped the page. Your parents' house is under joint ownership. But here's where it gets interesting. She pointed at a section. Your father used your house's sale proceeds to pay off an equity loan on his property. I sat back, trying to process it. So, he sold mine to save his? She nodded, which means your money, technically, went into that house. It's now entangled in their asset structure. My breath hitched. So you're saying I can? File a constructive trust suit, she finished. If the court agrees that they enriched themselves unfairly with your property proceeds, you can petition to seize an equal value stake, or more, from their home. I stared at her. For the first time in weeks, something inside me lit up, a flicker of fire where the numbness had been. What do I need to do? She smiled. Let me do the digging. You just don't say a word to them. Not yet. So I didn't. For 2 weeks, I stayed quiet. I went back to the base. I did my work. I kept my head down. But every night, I went over the plan in my head, like a mission briefing. Every room in their house had a cost. The bedroom? 2 deployments. The kitchen? Every missed birthday. The living room? Every Sunday, I watched my mom praise Caleb for his football trophies while ignoring my letters from Afghanistan. This wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning. By week 3, my lawyer called again. They lied on the sales affidavit. I blinked. Excuse me? They claimed you had verbally consented to the sale. That's how they rushed it through so fast. But I didn't. Exactly. That's misrepresentation. And in this state, if we show intent to mislead the closing agency, we can file a motion to void part of the transaction chain. I exhaled. So they're toast. Not yet, but we're getting close. We filed the first motion that Friday. My name was listed as the petitioner, my parents as the respondents. The next day, I got a text from Mom. Call me. Now? I didn't. 2 hours later, a voicemail from Dad. His voice wasn't angry. It was tight. Clipped. Leah, what are you doing? This is family. We helped you. You owe us. I pressed delete without listening to the rest. They helped me. I thought about sleeping in barracks while they enjoyed holidays in my house. I thought about Caleb throwing a party in my living room while I dodged mortar fire in Kabul. I didn't owe them. If anything, they owed me. The court hearing was scheduled for 4 weeks from then. And I would be there, in uniform, with documents in hand, not to beg, not to cry, but to take back what they thought I'd never fight for. The day I showed up at the courthouse, I wore my uniform. Not because I needed the validation, but because I wanted them to remember exactly who they betrayed. I walked through those courthouse doors like I had through checkpoints overseas. Calm, focused, prepared. My lawyer, Aaron, met me in the hallway. They're already inside. I nodded. Let's end this. When I stepped into the courtroom, my parents were seated together at the defendant's table. Dad looked furious. Mom looked pale. Caleb wasn't there. Of course not. He never showed up unless someone else paid the tab. I took my seat across from them. Neither of them looked me in the eye. Aaron whispered, "We've got enough to go after full financial restitution. And we'll argue that their misrepresentation warrants a constructive trust on the house." The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then it began. Aaron opened with documents, dates, statements, bank transfers. She painted the picture like an artist with fire in her veins. The petitioner was actively deployed overseas when her home was sold without informed consent, she said. The proceeds of that sale were used, in part, to clear a second mortgage on the respondent's personal residence. The judge frowned. Dad shifted in his seat. Mom kept her eyes down. Then came their attorney, gray-haired, smug. He stood and said, "Your Honor, the respondents had power of attorney. They acted within legal rights. Furthermore, the petitioner never revoked it." "But," the judge interrupted, "did the petitioner give explicit consent to sell the house?" The lawyer paused, stuttered. Well, verbal consent was implied, given the financial strain and family circumstances." Aaron stood up so fast her chair almost fell back. "Your Honor, implied consent is not legal consent, especially when the beneficiary of that transaction is the one initiating it." She dropped the final folder on the desk. "Here are screenshots of a text from the respondent to the listing agent saying, quote, 'She won't find out until she's back. Just move it fast.'" Mom gasped. Dad's face turned stone. The courtroom went silent. I stared straight ahead. No emotion, no flinch, no fear. The judge looked at my father. "Sir, did you send this message?" Dad clenched his jaw. "I did." "And you did so while your daughter was overseas unaware?" He didn't answer. "Didn't need to." The judge leaned back in his chair. "Motion for constructive trust is under review. In the meantime, I am issuing a temporary injunction. The respondents may not sell, transfer, or borrow against their current property until this matter is resolved." I exhaled slowly. It wasn't over, but it was the first step. After the hearing, Mom approached me outside. Her voice was quiet. "Leah, please, you're breaking this family apart." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, you broke it the moment you sold my home and called it family." She blinked hard. Tears formed, but I didn't care anymore. Because justice doesn't ask for feelings. It demands truth. And mine had just walked into the courtroom and sat down in front of everyone. 1 week after the hearing, Caleb finally reached out. A single text. "We need to talk. It's not what you think." I stared at my phone for a long time. Then, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I agreed. We met at a diner just outside town. Neutral ground. He was already there when I arrived. Same smug grin, but it faded the moment he saw my face. I didn't sit. Not yet. "You have 5 minutes," I said. He motioned toward the seat across from him. "Leah, come on. Can we not do the soldier routine?" I sat silent, waiting. He sighed. "I didn't know they were going to sell it." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "I just needed a place to crash. I didn't know they'd actually sell it. I thought maybe they'd rent it out or something. Not wipe your name off the deed." I folded my arms. "You didn't notice that your new place suddenly had my furniture? My dog tags hanging on the doorknob?" He flinched. I was in a bad place, okay? My ex had just kicked me out. I was broke. They said you wouldn't care. I leaned forward. They said I wouldn't care? He nodded. They said you were overseas, making bank, that you weren't even living there, that it was just sitting empty and it was stupid not to use it. My throat tightened. And you didn't once stop to ask if I knew? He looked down. I didn't want to know. There it was. The truth, raw and cowardly. He didn't want to know, because then he'd have to feel guilty. He'd have to do the one thing no one in my family ever did. Take responsibility. I stood. But then he said something that stopped me cold. They used the leftover money to renovate the kitchen. I froze. What money? He looked up. They didn't tell you. I shook my head slowly. There was about $40,000 left after the mortgage was paid off. They didn't use it to pay bills. They remodeled the house. New counters. A freaking double oven. I felt my knees weaken, but I didn't sit. I didn't yell. I just breathed. And every breath tasted like betrayal. Thanks for the chat, I said. Then I walked out. Back to my car. Back to my plan. I called Erin the next day. I want full restitution, I said. Not just to share. I want the house. She didn't hesitate. Then, we escalate. We file for equitable ownership based on fraud and unjust enrichment. Good, I replied, because now it wasn't just about the house. It was about every dollar they spent pretending they built a life they stole from me. They used me as their ATM, their doormat, their safety net. But not anymore. The next court date was set. And this time, I'd bring everything. Every statement, every receipt, every photo of my name on the original deed. Because this time, I wasn't just fighting to get my house back. I was fighting to make sure they never did it to me or anyone. Again. The courtroom was fuller this time. 2 local reporters. An observer from the county clerk's office. Even a law student taking notes from the back. Word had gotten around. The soldier whose family sold her house. People wanted to see how it would end. I didn't flinch. I brought a thick binder. Dates, receipts, photos, statements. Proof that the $40,000 profit wasn't used for bills. Proof they used it to remodel their kitchen. Proof they'd been lying to everyone, including themselves. Erin opened strong. We are requesting full ownership rights to the defendant's property under equitable claim, she said. The plaintiff's home was sold without proper consent. The proceeds were funneled into the defendant's property and used to increase its market value. She paused, then added, this was not survival. This was theft dressed up as necessity. The judge turned to my parents. Do you dispute these statements? Dad stood, straightened his jacket. His voice was low, almost rehearsed. We did what we thought was best for the family. Leah wasn't using the house. We were struggling. The judge interrupted. Did you tell the closing agency that your daughter had consented to the sale? A beat of silence. Then Dad said, we might have said she was okay with it. Was she? No, he admitted. That was all the court needed to hear. A lie, said on the record. A misrepresentation by legal definition. The judge turned to our side. Present the evidence. Erin opened the binder like she was laying down the truth, brick by brick. Receipts for the new kitchen countertops. A check paid to Homestyle Renovations, LLC, dated 2 weeks after the house was sold. Before and after photos pulled from a listing archive. Even credit card records from a celebratory dinner at an upscale steakhouse. All paid with money that came from my name. The judge's frown deepened with each page. Then came the final blow. Erin said, Your Honor, we also have a video. A short clip from my Ring doorbell archive. It was grainy but clear. Caleb and Dad unloading boxes from a moving truck, laughing. Dad saying, Leah won't mind. She's probably halfway around the world by now. That was the last nail. My lawyer rested her case, and I didn't say a word, not because I had nothing to say, but because they had said everything already with their actions. The judge didn't rule that day. He said he needed time to review everything. but I saw it in his eyes, in the way he looked at my parents, in the way he nodded slowly as Aaron packed up our documents. We had won the room, and soon we'd win the house. Outside, Mom tried to approach me again. This time, I didn't stop. Didn't look. Didn't breathe her in like some ghost of who she used to be. Because the truth was simple now. They weren't my home. They were just the reason I had to rebuild one. The ruling came on a rainy Monday. Not a verdict, but a summons. The judge wanted both parties in chambers. Private review, Aaron told me, could go either way. I nodded, jaw clenched. I didn't like secrets. Not after everything. We arrived at the courthouse at noon. Inside, the air felt heavier than usual. The judge sat at the head of a narrow table, calm, detached, like he wasn't about to shift the entire future of my life. He looked at us, then at my parents. I've reviewed the documents, I've reviewed the video. I find the misrepresentation credible. However, that word, that cursed word, I felt my throat tighten. However, due to the power of attorney being active at the time, and the real estate firm proceeding under good faith, I cannot legally void the sale of the original property. I swallowed hard. What does that mean? It means the house you lost is gone, he said. Unrecoverable through court. My stomach dropped. My fists clenched under the table. I felt the burn in my chest. But then he continued. However, I am prepared to issue an equitable order that entitles you to seize a majority stake in the respondent's property, based on unjust enrichment. I blinked. You mean their house? The judge nodded. You can take ownership. Not full eviction, but a court-approved lien that gives you control and legal stake. You'd become the majority owner. Mom gasped. Dad went rigid. That's not fair, Dad barked. She's trying to destroy us. You destroyed her first, the judge replied, not even looking up. Then he leaned forward. Unless, of course, both parties would prefer to settle. The room went silent. And that's when Dad spoke. We'd like to offer a settlement, he said. Mom looked stunned. He ignored her. Aaron narrowed her eyes. What kind of settlement? Dad licked his lips. We sign over the house entirely, but she signs a non-disclosure agreement. No media, no story, no lawsuit, no contact. My mouth parted. You want me to take the house and disappear? He looked straight at me, cold, calculated. No headlines, no internet drama, no embarrassing details in public court documents, just a clean break, you get everything, and we never speak again. Aaron looked at me. My hands were shaking beneath the table, not from fear, from rage, but also from relief. Because I had a choice now. Drag this to the public eye, or take the house and burn the bridge. Aaron whispered, It's your call. I thought of the living room I grew up in. I thought of my dog tags hanging on a doorknob left behind. I thought of silence. Of freedom. Of finally cutting every string they tied to my worth. I'll sign it, I said, but I want the deed first. Dad paused, then nodded. Deal. And just like that, I took the house and never looked back. 2 weeks later, the papers were signed. The house was mine. Legally, officially, irrevocably. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood in front of it, my parents' house, and slid the new key into the lock. The same lock I once slammed as a teenager after being told I was too intense. The same door I once painted for my mom on her birthday while Caleb was off partying. It opened with a soft click. Empty. They had already moved out. I'd given them 10 days to clear everything. They took their furniture, their photos, their memories, but they left something else behind. A letter. Sitting on the mantel, it was from Mom. Just a single page. No dear Leah, no love, Mom. Just shaky cursive on old stationery. You were always the strong one. We didn't know how to love you right. I hope one day you'll forgive us. I folded the note and slid it into the back of a drawer. Not to keep it close, but to remind myself how silence tastes when it's too little, too late. I walked through each room. The upstairs bathroom still had the chipped tile I cut my foot on as a kid. The attic still smelled like mothballs and secrets. But the kitchen, that kitchen glistened. Polished marble counters, state-of-the-art appliances, pendant lights hanging like chandeliers. Bought with the profit of my stolen home. A monument to betrayal. So I did what I needed to. I called a demolition company the next morning. They arrived within the week. By noon, the entire kitchen had been gutted. Every inch of it, gone. I didn't sell the cabinets, didn't donate the appliances. I had them torn out and scrapped. Not out of spite, out of principle. That kitchen didn't belong to me. It never did. It was the product of lies. And I wanted no trace of it. The contractor asked, "What do you want to replace it with?" I smiled faintly. Something simple. Strong. Quiet. The next day I stood in the empty space and breathed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's house. I felt home. Later that week, I filed one last document, an order with the county clerk's office, to place a no trespassing notice on the property against 2 individuals, my parents. It wasn't petty. It was protection. Because I knew them. I knew they'd show up eventually. Claim they just wanted to talk. Claim it was their house first. But it wasn't. Not anymore. This house had a new deed. A new lock. A new name. Mine. It happened exactly 19 days after the deed transfer. I was in the backyard, clearing out an old shed. Dust, spiders, memories. The kind of work that forces you to face the past, whether you want to or not. That's when I heard tires on gravel. Slow. Too slow. I peeked through the fence slats. It was them. My parents. Standing just outside the gate, like they hadn't been served legal notice. Like I hadn't signed a paper that ended everything between us. I stayed where I was. I watched. Mom looked thinner. Tired. Dad looked the same. Stiff shoulders, clenched jaw, like life was still something he could command by raising his voice. They didn't knock. Didn't call out. Just stood there. For almost 10 minutes. Then Mom placed something on the mailbox and turned away. Dad hesitated, then followed. They drove off in silence. I waited another minute before I walked up to the front. It was an envelope. No name, no address, just taped shut. I opened it carefully. Inside was a photo. Me in uniform from years ago. Standing beside Caleb, smiling stiffly, and behind us, Mom and Dad, grinning like we were a Hallmark commercial. On the back, in faded ink, Mom had written, "We weren't always like this." I stared at the photo for a long time. Then, without a word, I walked inside. I didn't frame it. I didn't throw it away either. I slid it between the pages of an old Army manual and tucked it in the attic. A memory, not a keepsake. That night, I sat on the porch. New chair, fresh paint, same breeze. I watched the sky darken, stars poking through like scars. And I thought about everything. The house I lost, the house I took, the family that traded me for comfort. People always say blood is thicker than water, but they forget the full quote. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It's not about shared DNA. It's about who stands beside you when everything goes dark. And my family? Nai loa chaz. They left me in the dark the moment I became inconvenient. When the kitchen broke, I paid. When the fridge died, I paid. When Caleb needed a cushion, I gave them my home. And they called it love. But love doesn't lie. Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't come with paperwork and betrayal. So I made peace with the silence. I made peace with the ghosts. Because the truth is, you don't have to set fire to the past to walk away from it. Sometimes, you just have to close the door and change the locks. It's been 6 months since the court handed me the keys to my parents' house. 6 months since I walked through the front door and realized I was standing in the middle of my own survival story. The walls are painted now. A soft slate gray. Clean. Quiet. Nothing loud. Nothing left over. I converted Caleb's old room into a small office, a place where I can breathe, think, plan. I hung my medals on the wall, not to show off, but to remind myself that I've earned everything they said I didn't deserve. Every inch of this floor, every tile in the bathroom, every beam in the ceiling, mine. I've had time to think, to really sit with it all. The betrayal, the manipulation, the quiet realization that the people who raised me had stopped seeing me as a daughter years ago. Somewhere along the way, I became a utility, a wallet, a resource. They used the language of family to disguise their hunger. And when I fought back, they called me heartless, ungrateful, cruel. But here's what I've learned. Being the strong one doesn't mean being the silent one. Being loyal doesn't mean being blind. And love, real love, doesn't require you to sacrifice your sanity for the sake of tradition. I haven't spoken to my parents since that day at the gate. No letters, no emails, no apologies, just silence. And it's the most peaceful sound I've ever known. Last week, I stood at the edge of the property line, where the mailbox used to be. I took it down, replaced it with a new one. Simple, steel, clean lines, and etched on the side just one word: Leah. Not Walker family, not return to sender, just mine. Because after everything they took, this was the part they didn't expect. That I'd rebuild, not to spite them, not to shame them, but because I deserved a life not built on debt and duty. A life where love was chosen, not demanded. A few days ago, my lawyer forwarded me a message. From Caleb. No subject. Just a sentence. If I ever need help, would you answer? I didn't reply. Not because I hate him, but because I finally understand the difference between closure and access. Closure is healing. Access is reopening the wound. And I've bled enough for this family, so no, he doesn't get to knock. Not anymore. This story isn't about revenge. It never was. It's about taking back what was stolen, about ending a cycle, about putting your name on something and finally believing you deserve it. So if you're reading this, if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own home, if you've been told you're too cold, too independent, too much, know this: you're not too much. You were just too strong for people who needed you weak. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is walking away, with your head high and your name etched in steel. What do you think about Leah's decision? Was she too harsh? Or was this the only way to truly protect herself? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories about family.